wondering now.
What's wrong? So I'll have the two presentations and then open for questions afterwards.
Yep.
We usually get Paul is one of the world's leading authorities in equity-based crowdfunding investments and raisings, and he's personally been involved in over $75 million worth of transactions with 90 different companies seeking capital. With the intense worldwide interest in crowdfunding regulations and raising, Paul's involved in consulting to a number of organisations and governments internationally on how to structure their funding portals, processes and regulations to achieve successful raises with a fair deal for investors. And Paul's recently come back from Las Vegas,
Yep.
where he's been right in the middle of the crowdfunding scene there. So thank you very much for fitting us into your busy schedule, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay. What we're going to cover in today's workshop is evaluation of crowdfunding. So lots of people have heard about crowdfunding, and there's lots of questions in people's minds about crowdfunding. So we're going to explain it. We're going to demystify it today, introduce you to the basics of it, and see if it's a right source, if it's a suitable option for you. So before we start, as I go through this, what I'd like you to do is just, can you indicate through the polling function whether you are actually looking for funding at the moment? So how many people who are joining the webinar today are actually actively looking for funds at the moment? So if you are, just select yes on your poll, and if not, please select no. So while that information is coming in, what we'll be covering is what is crowdfunding. So evaluation of crowdfunding as a funding source for your new idea. having a look at the benefits of crowdfunding, but also some of the pitfalls and some general tips and tricks for those who are experienced in the field and some success stories there. And then we'll be having a look at the Australian Small Scales Offering Board and its range of offerings and resources available. And then, of course, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask your questions. And there is never a silly question, just the one that's not asked. So please take the opportunity during the webinar to type your questions in, and at the end to ask your questions about crowdfunding while we have the experts in the room. It's a great opportunity for you today. So the results of the poll are in, and of the people who are tuned into the webinar today, 64% of you are actively looking to raise funds at the moment. So that's fantastic, and 36% are not probably finding information or maybe even thinking about it. So I'd like to ask Krystian now to lead us through demystifying what crowdfunding is and is it suitable for you.
Thanks very much, Denise. I guess first we'll start out by defining crowdfunding, and here's a very nicely worded definition I've found, and it's basically just finding funding for a venture, and it could be, it's usually through obviously a lot of people contributing money over the internet. Now there's a number of ways that they can do that, and there's a number of different platforms and avenues they can do that, but in general that's what we're talking about. Lots of people contributing reasonably small amounts in comparison, and usually using some kind of cloud-based, internet-based platform. Crowdfunding in general has been pretty big over the last few years, and just to give people an estimate, the most recent statistics I could find was about $5.5 billion US dollars that have been raised through crowdfunding over the last few years. Now there's a number of different types of crowdfunding, and Paul and I are going to go through hopefully all of them, but I'm going to concentrate on the first one on the slide here, which is rewards-based crowdfunding. Now rewards-based crowdfunding is very simple. Someone has an idea, you can either, for a product, you can either pre-purchase that product, and if the crowdfunding reaches its goal, then you basically acquire that product and someone ships it to you. There's other ways of doing it. If you're funding a project, it could be, the reward could be some kind of product to do with the project. Could be a mouse mat, could be a coffee mug, could be a signed thank you card from the people who are running the project. If you're crowdfunding a movie or a book, it could be that you get your name in the inside of cover of a book or in the credits of the movie, or even a speaking role in the movie if you contribute enough. What we're talking about is you don't have any ownership of the product or anything else other than the reward that you get given. Equity-based crowdfunding is different. You actually buy a slice of the company that's looking to develop a product or products. And that's something I'll leave to my esteemed colleague Paul. But basically it's almost akin to, I guess the easiest way to explain it is like the stock exchange, where a company can sell parts of its ownership to small to players for small amounts of money. And then there's credit and debt based. So you're actually lending people money on terms, and then they pay you back eventually, hopefully, if the project goes ahead. All of these carry risks of the project not going ahead and other things, but we'll cover that as we go along. Now, the first question you really need to ask yourself is crowdfunding right for you? Now, again, I'm going to look at this from a rewards-based crowdfunding side, and I'll let Paul take care of the equity-based. But what are the good things? First of all, you've got access to capital. Now, from a rewards-based crowdfunding, that could actually mean that you've got pre-orders for your product. If you have a product that's a fast-moving consumer good or something that's for day-to-day use, we're talking about cameras, phones, all those kinds of things, you can actually pre-order the product. You can be the first in the world to get it, and companies can actually be sure of starting their manufacturing runs when they have a large number of pre-orders. That can really get them kicked off very, very well. It validates your company and it validates your product. Putting your idea out there and asking people to put their money, their hard-earned money against it, validates whether your product is successful enough. It can also validate how well you do your marketing, which I'll talk about later on, but it's very, very good for something called fast failure. Now that actually, it sounds bad, but it's a very, very good thing because it stops a lot of companies from wasting time and effort in investing money and resources towards products that eventually might not get up. So if you can validate a product very, very quickly without wasting too much money, then you've got yourself a winner. Rewards-based crowdfunding also establishes a customer base. You are asking for people to support your idea and pre-purchase a product or to support a project, and they're actually putting money towards it. And it allows you a unique marketing channel as well. This is something that you can market to literally millions of people before your product even enters production. So it really does assist in getting a product off the ground. Now, sometimes things don't go so well, and these are some of the things that probably work against crowdfunding. Depending on the platform you use, sometimes it is all or nothing. So if you don't meet your predetermined goal, if you're asking for pre-purchase of 5,000 products and you get to 4,950, you may not be able to cash that money out and go ahead with the 4,950. The platform may not allow you to do that. Your IP is at risk. It's on the internet. If you do not have your IP protected, and it doesn't matter if it's on an Australian crowdfunding platform or an American one or a European one, anyone can see it. And if you don't have your IP protected in another country somewhere, it is at risk of being copied. It's not, well, history so far has shown that reward crowdfunding isn't really quite right for business-to-business products. It really is a consumer-driven platform and a consumer-driven sorry, there's something going on here with the PowerPoint.
Sorry about that.
It's really a consumer-driven funding stream. So realistically, business to business, you're not getting that same penetration. We're really looking for simple, not complicated products. And what I mean by simple is simple to explain, not simple in the way that it works. And it's not really suited for high capital needs and high entry as well. And I'll show you an example of that as well. So really you need to have a project and you need to have a product that really allows for that everyday consumer to get involved. And also there's the point of instant gratification. Your product really does need to be almost ready for, in terms of its life cycle, to go into production. People do not want to invest in crowdfunding, in reward crowdfunding projects that have got lengthy R&D timelines attached to them because they're buying over the internet. They want it next week. They're not going to get it next week, obviously, but that's the kind of mentality that you're dealing with when it comes to this type of funding. Now, some success stories. Are we? Yep. So we're going to talk about some good success stories, first of all. And I'm going to get to my favorite one, first of all, and that's Oculus Rift. That's a virtual reality headset that launched to market, I believe it was around about 2013. Now, this really captured the imagination of a lot of people because we've been promised virtual reality for the last 20 years or so, and it's been clunky. It hasn't been developed properly, but what Oculus Rift did is actually solved all of those problems. It is so good, it's actually been used by the Norwegian Defence Forces inside their tanks to give their tank drivers full 3D visualization around their tanks, so they're not restricted. We're talking about gaming companies, surgeons. It has so many, it's such a good product, it has so many applications. It raised $2.4 million from a $250,000 goal, and it caught the attention of Facebook, and 18 months after its crowdfunding, it was actually bought for $2 billion US. Now that's a great success story. It did have its negatives. A lot of people were a little bit upset that they thought that they'd supported a grassroots product movement and a large conglomerate had come over and bought it. But I'm pretty sure as the business owners, the people who started Oculus Rift, wouldn't have been complaining in any way, shape or form. The Pebble watch. Everyone's talking about wearable technologies. This was the first one onto the market, and it really, again, captured people's imagination. It raised $1 million in its first 28 hours. It went viral over the internet, and people were just buying it. It allows people to, it's cross-platform, it's a fantastic product. You can still buy it, but it was first to market. Apple, Microsoft, everyone else have caught up 3 or 4 years later, but this is still the #1 product out there. And it managed to raise a very extraordinary $10 million, which is in reward crowdfunding circles, that's actually quite an extraordinary amount of money. It wouldn't be the AIC if I didn't include an Australian product, and that's the Fly 6, which is a bike camera. It's a rear light and also a full HD camera, and it allows people to record what's happening behind them. And you just need to see the news every week. There's an incident of a cyclist being hit from behind by a car. This actually records the last 30 or 60 seconds of their ride, and it has a gyroscope inside it, so if the unit itself feels a crash, it stops recording, and you've got evidence to use for whatever you need it for. It reached 280% of its funding goal very, very quickly because, again, it met the needs of an untapped need of a lot of people in the market. And there's also the ridiculous. Now, rewards-based crowdfunding does have a few ridiculous ideas, and it would be very remiss of me not to mention one of my favorite and I guess rewards funding stories to date, and that's potato salad. Someone wanted to demonstrate the fact that you don't need a great product on crowdfunding platforms, you just need an idea and a good marketing strategy, and they managed to raise $55,000 to make a $10 potato salad. Now that's a case study unto itself, but what it does show is that once something goes viral, once your product is out there and you have a very, very good marketing strategy, captures people's imagination or it's humorous in some way, and it can really take off and it can really, really do well. Now, there's obviously not so good news either, and one of the key aspects, or one of the key case studies that we can look at here is something called the Ubuntu Edge. Now, this predates the iPhone, it predates a lot of the smartphones these days, and it was a seriously good product. Anyone who's been into mobile phone technology will tell you that that phone is fantastic. It's still better than most of the ones out there. The problem is they asked for $32 million. They managed to break a lot of records in their raise in the meantime. They got almost $13 million in that raise, but it still failed because of the extraordinarily large amount of money that they wanted from this product. It really was too high, despite the fact that they were on CNN and they were all over the internet, etc. So you really do have to be quite reasonable with what you're asking for. And again, not to put a downer on things, but typical Kickstarter statistics say that only 44% of projects meet their funding goal, and about 40 out of the 60,000 projects that fail don't even get 20% of their goal. So really that's a massive trap, and it's something to really bear in mind when you're looking at this. All funding streams or all funding areas have their failure rates. Venture capital, the rule of thumb is that 1 or 2% of products will get funded, and when you're developing a product, it's usually about 1 in 64 that really come up and make something in terms of profits. Crowdfunding is no different. It does have a failure rate. You do have to bear that in mind and have a plan B, C, D, and E. Now, a few keys to successful rewards crowdfunding. First of all, have realistic goals, and we saw that with the Ubuntu Edge phone. Have a simple to explain product. Now, again, it doesn't have to be a simple product itself, but you need to have your elevator pitch and your marketing and your explanation of the product and its benefits down to a fine art. Be close to production, or at least have a prototype you can show to people. Again, that goes to that whole instant gratification thing we talked about earlier. And it's just as much about the product as it is the marketing campaign, which the potato salad and a raft of other, I guess, examples can can illustrate. Really having good branding, having a good message, being clean, clear-cut and professional in the way that you present is very, very important. The only way you get to interact with your potential customers is over the internet. You might have a video, you might have a quick presentation and some words, but they can't touch and feel your product. They don't have a shop they can go to. So really your marketing campaign really has to be on the spot. Be able to tell a good story. Have a great story about the potentials for a product. And I'll include a link to something called the Solar Roads project, which tells a fantastic story. They're an American company that want to make all of the roads in the US into solar panels and solar collectors. Fantastic. Now, you talk to an engineer and they'll tell you that it's probably, first of all, not that feasible, and secondly, you could spend all that money into building traditional solar power plants and get about 4 times the output. But the fact is they told a really great story and people bought the potential. They didn't buy the actual product itself. And find sneezers. Now, sneezers is an internet marketing term because they make things go viral. You've got a lot of celebrities, you've got a lot of people who have lots of followers on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of those things. If they like your product and if they mention it, it doesn't have to be an endorsement. If they think it's cool, if they think it's great, if it captures people's imagination, it will spread. And that really, really increases your chances for a good rewards-based crowdfunding raise. Again, get good marketing advice. Be branded well and have a professional image. Make sure you have all of that in place before you go to market. Protect your IP. We talked about that earlier. Make sure that you're protected at least in your main markets that you're aiming for. Get good tax advice as well. If you're not going to, even if you do use an Australian platform, if you use an overseas platform, make sure you're covered off on things like GST. Make sure you're covered off on foreign earnings and all those kinds of things. You could get caught 6 to 12 months down the track with a hefty bill, and it could send your idea plummeting. Again, if you're going overseas or if you're manufacturing overseas, make sure you hedge your currency risks. You don't get to change the amount that you're asking for once you've actually started your raise. So if all of a sudden currencies fall or appreciate in the wrong direction to what you're hoping they do, your product could end up costing twice as much as you originally thought it would. And therefore you'll be caught out. You'll still need to deliver, but you'll end up out of pocket. And also, going to that, price your product correctly. So make sure you include commissions and fees that the platform are going to charge you. Make sure you've covered all of your costs. Don't be too greedy, but make sure you just price it correctly so that way, again, you're not out of pocket on that first raise. So it's probably a lot to take in, but we've got a very large amount of territory to cover in a very short period of time. So I'll be happy to take questions on that a little bit later. Thank you very much for that. That concludes the rewards-based crowdfunding section.
Look, thanks for that, Krystian. That was great. Great introduction. Thank you very much for demystifying crowdfunding and giving us some tips on how to be successful. I'd like to hand over now to Paul. Paul Niederer through ASSOB has helped more than 300 companies raise around $140 million on the ASSOB platform. Paul is very active in the crowdfunding scene internationally. And Paul, if you'd like to tell us about equity crowdfunding and what you do with ASSOB.
I will do, and thank you very much for turning up for the call. You know, basically, fundamentally, when you look at it, for any project, funding is required, and then there's a platform that legitimizes the raise, the crowd is attracted, and investors manifest, and then the funding goals are achieved. And it seems really simple when you look at those 4 steps, but just as Krystian was telling you, there are 2 different types primarily of crowdfunding. One is based on instant gratification, and the other is based on hope. And the one that I'm covering is based on hope. And with instant gratification, you know you're going to get the cooler, or you're going to get the recipe, or you're going to get something within a few days. But hope and equity, if you've got your business and you're seeking investors, then they're going to sit around waiting and hoping that the $10,000 or whatever they give you is going to come back sometime in the future. So being based on hope, and as we go through this presentation, I'm virtually telling you how to build up that legitimacy and credibility and hope so that people do invest. Because all of you will have a little idea or something that you want to raise money for, and that's often there are just you, or maybe there's a team of people around that says, this is a great idea, what are we going to do with it? Now traditionally what used to happen, people used to go to somebody that they were pointed to, and they had a magic Rolodex there where they'd say, oh wow, thanks for coming in, I love your idea, and they'd reach behind their desk and they'd say, well here's the 50,000 you're after, and it was a nice clean transaction. But you know, those days are pretty much gone, and if you find somebody like that, then that's excellent, because you know, as long as they don't tie you up in a straitjacket, you can take the money and move on. But for most people, they're going to need a lot of different contributors in order to get a raise away. And a platform like the one I manage, it gets people, like it's overseas investors, it might be suppliers, celebrities, customers, all sorts of people that will come onto the platform, view your profile page, and invest in what you're doing. And so to date, we've raised around $141 million, and there's been around 300 companies that have done that. But the interesting thing is that 61% of the investors have been retail, and that's what we normally call mum and dad investors. So it's people around the entity, 1, 2, and 3 degrees out from the entity, that think what these people are doing is pretty cool and they want to contribute. Most investment also comes from pretty much the same state, 63% of investment. So how it works really, just as it was with the reward crowdfunding, a profile page is developed in which often there's a video which gives you a 62% better chance of raising the money. The pitch in an equity one is pretty much the offer document that's written, and in it there will be a goal. And then there must be some form of progress measurement in terms of a bar, or we use squares on ASSOB. And then you've got to keep people updated, because you'd be surprised how long it takes for somebody to make up their mind about investing. Some people invest straight away, but other people might wait 3 months until they hear that you have got some traction, you have got some investors, you are achieving some goals, so then they feel motivated to put that investment in. And the other good thing about, just like reward crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding platforms are entrepreneur friendly. It's on your terms, because if you go to an angel or a VC or somebody like that, they write the terms. They pretty much say, well, if I give you this 100,000, I want to be able to fire the CEO, I want to be able to do this, I want to be able to do that. But on these platforms, what it is that you, the entrepreneur, it is your offer. You determine the terms, so that it makes it a lot easier like that. But in saying that, if you have a look at this graph we've got here, people that are VCs, private equity, angel investors, people like that, if you look up that left-hand column, they're looking often for 10 times return. So if you're saying, look, here's my business, I want you to invest in it, they'll be thinking, yes, but will it give me 10 times return? Now, if it doesn't, then you've got to look at a different category of investor. And so if you look at this often in the early stage when you're just getting going, it's going to be in that bottom left square where family, friends, fans, followers of the business who are emotionally attached to it will actually say, okay, we'll contribute and get you going. And later on when your business grows, you'll head up to that top right one there where you've got the VCs, the institutions, the angel investors. So it's important to recognize where your business is at so you can match it to the type of investors that you get. And often people say, like, 6 degrees out, you're connected to anybody in the world. Like you know, through 6 people I know, I could probably get to President Obama or whatever. And so usually with this, the capital raising team, which might be your founders, your shareholders, directors, your accountant, your lawyer, and people like that, 1 degree out from that, that's their contacts, is where your first amount of money will often come from. And then The second degree out is friends of those people. So usually there's some form of introduction or event or something that needs to get to those people. And further out, often there's people you've got no connection with at all. And often people think, well, they're the people we'd love to get the money from. But they tend to be the angels and the VCs and the family offices and people like that. Now, that's a harder task, but if you get to that level and get those people interested, and it may be the 10 times return, or it might be the promise of wonderful returns like the Oculus one that Krystian mentioned, that's when you really get the good money. Now, there's all sorts of companies have raised money on ASSOB. It's gone from plastic wine barrels with Flex Tank to titanium welding and with KT to Photo Merchant, which is a site. Titan Media was an outdoor advertising. They sold outdoor advertising. Little Nest Furnishings was an interesting one. It was a young woman that had a furnishing business, and you think, well, gosh, you know, do people really want to invest in a furniture business? But then it was children's designer furniture, and then some of the customers were in Hollywood and some were in Beijing. So all of a sudden, the story developed. So, you know, there's lots of different types of businesses that can grace the platform. What we've found, though, and this is something, as I'm talking now and you're thinking about your own business, there's three things. If somebody rings me up and says, oh, do you think I could raise money for my business? I've got these three circles in my head: story, team, and followers. And each of them are rated out of 10. And so first of all, you've got to have a convincing, compelling, and credible story. And each of those words is important. And you know yourselves, if you're at a barbecue or somewhere like that and somebody says, oh, I'm thinking of raising money, and somebody says, oh, what for? And then what comes out of your mouth next has got to be convincing, compelling, and credible. And if they say to you, you've got to keep me posted, that sounds amazing, then you know you've got a convincing and compelling, credible story. And Krystian mentioned that as well, how important the story was. So focus on building that and working with somebody till people say, wow, that's what you're doing is really, really good. And then you've got to have a balanced, capable, and passionate and likable team. And that means pretty much you've got to have the Steve Jobs and the Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak would have been really happy just making the circuit boards for the Apple One, and as long as people sold them and paid them the money it took for the parts, he was quite happy because he loved making the circuit boards. But Steve Jobs, he wanted to put a computer on everybody's desk in the world. So when you go along to see somebody with money, if they see you and you just look like a nerdy person that's never really going to get out there into the market, but you've got a wonderful product, then they're going to be saying, well, look, who's going to be selling this? Who's going to be managing it? Who's going to be growing this business? So that's what they want. They want that part. And the third part is people has to actually want your sort of product. There's got to be people out there that you can share the story with and that will be engaged in what you're doing. And, you know, if you're into underwater electricity generation, then you've got to find a group of people or a sector of the market or LinkedIn groups or whatever where the people reside that are interested in underwater electricity generation. And, of course, you've got have a platform that's going to allow you to tell your story. Just as a general guideline, I went back through the last 14 raises on the platform, and they raised in total 11.5 million from around 300 investors. But the figure that's important to you is $800,000. Each of those raises raised $800,000. And so you think, right, what do I have to do for my business if I use an equity crowdfunding platform to raise $800,000? Well, the one thing that is really apparent is the more people that follow what you're doing, the more investors you get. And it sounds really, really obvious. And it's the same with reward crowdfunding, that the more people that are interested in what you're doing, the best. And so what we've found is each of these companies that raised on average 800,000 had 660 visitors or people that graced their page, that came and checked out to look at what they're doing. Of those 660, 202 were that enthused about it that they downloaded the offer document. And then from those 202, there were 17 investors. And so, you know, I can say with pretty much certainty, if you get those statistics onto our platform or another platform, you're going to get your raise. But for a lot of people, they think, right, where am I going to find the 660? Well, you've just got to sit around with the people helping with your raising and work out who loves us, who thinks we're great, who's invested in this space before. It's really just building up a marketing campaign for the capital raising, because it's not like you're selling your product in the reward side of crowdfunding, you're actually selling a share of your business. You're selling equity. So it's a marketing project to sell the shares in your business. So to wrap up and summarize this and then move on to questions, first of all, you've got to decide, do you want to have one big investor that just comes along and gives you the money? And if that's the case, you can seek them out and you can find them, and that's good. If not, then you've got to structure your business and your marketing campaign for lots of people to be able to put investment into your business. Work out what type of people they are. If you have got a 10 times return and it is incredibly attractive to an angel investor or private equity or VCs, then structure your business for that. Otherwise, you're going to have to work with people that are 1, 2, and 3 degrees outside of the capital raising team. And that'll be family, friends, fans, followers, customers, suppliers, people that are already in the domain of your business or your niche. You need a convincing, compelling, incredible story. You need a balanced, passionate, capable, and likable team. And you need lots of suitable people to share the story and engage. In terms of ASSOB, on our site, there is a button. If you want to raise capital, you click it, fill in a simple form, and then a funding strategist will get back to you. So that's it for me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. That's a great overview of how equity crowdfunding works, and particularly using the ASSOB platform. So we have a couple of questions have come in so far, and if you do have any questions, please just type them in. So now what happens if you don't get full funding or you get too much? Do you have to give it back?
Okay, well, in terms of rewards-based crowdfunding, it really depends on the platform you're using. Generally, if you don't get full funding or if you don't get enough orders for your products, then that's considered a failed raise, and you don't give the money back because it's never actually given to you. You're only ever given the money once the raise is actually successful. So if you go over, and I think I mentioned before on my presentation, the Fly 6, the bike light, actually raised 280% of its intended raise. You get the money. You just have to deliver on all of those products. So if you originally want, it's a minimum that you set. If you originally want to sell 1,000 products but you get an order for 2,500, are you going to say no? It might bring your per unit cost down, so it might actually mean that you end up with more profits. So no, most platforms will allow you to take the money. You still have to deliver on your promise, though. That is very, very key. And there are some very severe penalties and other things that can happen if you don't. So yes, if you're really successful, you get to keep the money, and if you're not, well, it depends on the platform.
With equity, it's a little bit different in that because it's a legal document and there's fundraising regulations, often there's a minimum subscription, which is the minimum amount of money that can be usefully used and beneficially to the shareholders. So say you've got $1 million raise, you might set your minimum subscription at $100,000, because if you only get the $100,000, you might employ a marketing manager, which will grow your business and you could move forward. With oversubscription, it's often not all that much in equity, because the offer document covers a certain amount of investment and what you're going to do with it. So if you get too much over, people that buy shares will think, oh, well, you know, they said they're only going to issue $1 million worth of shares, and now they've issued $2 million, which means it's sort of watered me down a bit. And so people like to think that you don't go too far on the oversubscription side.
Okay. So another question, just following on from that. So should you err on the side of being conservative about the amount you're asking for, or should you?
Well, history's shown really that the smaller raise works better. But of course, it's got to be generally right. But I think the Pebble watch was only 100,000, I think, when they started off, and they got 14 million.
Wow.
And so, you know, it tends to, but that's because it's pre-sales. Like, yes, the more people that put in for that watch, the more you get back. And interesting from statistics point of view, Neil Young completed not long ago a raise. Every time he went to the recording studios, he was incredibly frustrated that when he listened to the music back home on his iPhone, he had the quality wasn't as good, because it's with MP3 it was compressed, and there was a lot of music disappeared. And so he thought that if I could just have a music player that high definition audio, then people could listen to my music at a high definition level. And so he managed to get $6 million in his raise for his Pono music player, which was great. It means lots of, I think 16,000 people ended up getting the Pono music player. But then Neil Young thought, well, gosh, this is great, but I don't really want to run this company with all these music players. So then he did an equity raise, which is just finished, and he raised $8 million on that equity to build a business to market and manage his Pono music player. So first of all, as Krystian was talking in rewards crowdfunding, he developed the sales channel and proved the concept, and then later on he built the business. And on the reward side, on the equity side, I was speaking to somebody in New York that managed the actual raise, and it was only, you know, not a handful of investors on the equity side, but it was, you know, probably less than 200 compared to 16,000 on the reward side, because people are there for a longer journey. They're going to say, oh, well, Apple might all of a sudden bring out high definition audio and you'll be able to play it on your iPhone, then that product will be defunct. You know, people think differently because they're going to have to put their thinking over 3 years.
Oh, excellent. Look, that actually ties in and leads on to the next question that we have, and it's what will funding look like in 10 years' time? So you've just told us about kind of linking the two types of crowdfunding there. So what do you see looking into the future?
Yeah, well, I've written an article about the fact that the word crowdfunding will disappear altogether, and it'll just be the normal way you do things. And I think that, as Krystian pointed out in the reward part, that people will cement in a sales history or show there's market demand, or they'll test it and find they might have 3 different variants of a product and find out which one's best. And then once they've nailed that down, they'll go for an equity raise, and then they'll grow their business through that. So I think that these forms of funding, of getting lots of people from all different places, will work in the future, but it won't be so much crowdfunding. It'll just be the normal way we do things. And I think, you know, the easiest example is where what spurred a lot of crowdfunding was the Facebook IPO. Because what happened there, you imagine a business where you already had 500 million passionate customers that loved your product, and then the only way they could get shares in it was they had to be a select client of Goldman Sachs. So when they couldn't do it because of securities regulations, and that's what equity crowdfunding is all about. So when it got to the point of view of it actually going public, the company, they pumped the share price up and said, now all the mum and dad investors can come in. And of course it dropped once they got all their shares, and people that had been the Goldman Sachs clients exited by selling their shares, and they had a nice little profit on theirs, and then it was left to the public. So in that environment, you can see that the days are gone, because maybe in the past you couldn't communicate with 500 million people to get their investment, but now you can. The internet is enabling the speed, the connection for investment to be handled that way. So I think that, you know, a lot of people say, is equity funding and all that here to stay? Well, it's not going to stop, because the internet's ability to connect people with products and solutions and ideas that they can be passionate about is going to go on faster and faster, and the methods of actually achieving it are going to be more and more.
And if we're going to go into a little bit of, I guess, economic theory, it really does allow for the more free movement of capital as well. So no longer are you as a company restricted to raising capital or getting money for your product from the country that you're actually living in or manufacturing in. So yes, you do have some considerations in terms of tax and currency, but you've always had that. What this actually allows you to do is tap into these markets without being restricted by, well, current, say, Australian, for example, legislation on fundraising. You can go overseas and do it very, very easily. So I see a lot of competition between a lot of platforms and even countries in improving their legislation worldwide to try and become a hub for crowdfunding platforms as well.
Okay, fascinating. I totally disrupted it. Okay, so another question. Can you use crowdfunding for something like publishing a book?
Yeah, well, there's a number of people doing it. If you go back to the story team followers I showed you, I know that, you know, there's lots of books being crowdfunded, but one of them was, for example, a person that felt very strongly about the plight of the Bangkok girls that worked the streets. and so she was a German girl, so she put up on the crowdfunding platform, she wanted to go there and talk to them and get their side of the story and create a book that people could get both the digital version and the printed version. And so she funded, she said she needed money for a camera, for her air tickets, for accommodation, for everything like that. And you'd get a copy of the book, and some of you get a copy of pictures, and for some people they just got a postcard. So it was that story. It was a convincing, compelling, incredible story. She managed to show that she was a person that could write the book. She was a journalist. She had the equipment to do it. And then, of course, she had a lot of people around the world that have wondered what actually happens there and that. So they were the followers. So, yeah, it was a good story. So as long as there's a cause or a passion or story that can be communicated that enough people can be engaged in and want to be part of, yes, a book is very capable of being written like that.
And I know one of the AIC's favourite books on business model innovation was actually crowdfunded as well. Yeah. So the names of all the contributors are inside the covers of the book as a permanent reminder for their now published works. So yes, absolutely. And
with that one, last week they published the follow-up book to that, which is called Value Creation. So they've gone from, first of all, crowdfunding their first book, but because they've been sold in 30 plus countries, now they're in a position where they can actually publish the next book themselves, and they've got, the publishers are tripping over themselves to actually do it.
Excellent. Okay. Are there any restrictions on who can use crowdfunding? For example, not-for-profits or research groups?
No, there's definitely social crowdfunding or I guess charitable crowdfunding that occurs as well. World Vision and a lot of other organisations have allowed you for many, many years to buy a goat or to buy someone a mosquito net. This basically, all it does is allows you to then takes it to the next level, and you can do it over the internet quite quickly with a few clicks of the button. It allows you to conduct, again, social good projects overseas. It allows you to contribute to research and those kinds of things. Obviously, the rewards aren't the same. You might get a thank you, you might get mentioned in something, but what they're really selling is the warm fuzzy feeling that you get for being associated with a project, which is a lot like a donation almost. And maybe a small reward by saying thank you, or a card, or I usually say mouse mat because it's just usually a very cheap kind of item that you get. But yes, absolutely, without a doubt.
The one thing when you think about technology is the word patron is, if you think of Mozart and you think of a lot of people who are creating music and things like that, they often used to have a patron or two. And I think what's happened in this world now is that anybody can be a patron. Anybody can support somebody they're passionate about. In fact, the first crowdfunding raise was a rock group called Mammalian or something like that wanted to tour America. And what they did was they put up on their website that any American cities could say how much money they're going to put in, and then they would go to the ones where they got the most money, and that was the crowd pulled them to wherever they were. So I think what's happening is really, because of technology, the payment systems, the extent, the reach, that each of us will become patrons for a number of things in our lives, whereas before it just used to be well-heeled people who had a lot of money and could have somebody like Mozart under their thumb.
Excellent. Okay. Another question. What's the normal length of time the funding campaign might be extended over?
Well, I know that Indiegogo recently, they came out and said that, often people have got 60 days, but they say around 45. Sometimes it can go down to 30, Krystian. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right.
For the reward side?
Usually you'll find that for a reward, from the reward side, that interest starts petering off at about the 30-day mark. If you do go viral, and if you are having quite a lot of success, you might go to that 45. But generally, 60 days, I'd say, is a bit too long. So you really have to have all your ducks in a row before you press that button.
So like 30 to 45 days.
Yeah, usually that.
And equity is probably between 2 months and 8 months.
They're great time frames, aren't they? While we have another couple of questions, and while we're doing this, I'd like to invite you to again use the polling function on your computer. Just from what we've heard and as we've been discussing, and now you know a little bit more about crowdfunding, do you think that crowdfunding might be a viable option for you? Has this kind of whetted your appetite? Are you more interested? Would you have a go at this? If you'd like to just poll yes or no, and those results will come in as we're talking. So the next question, has equity raising been used for something like construction of a small process plant, less than 4 million with, say, 10 to 20 years expected revenue?
Well, I don't know about the 10 to 20 revenue, but our largest raise on the platform was 3.2 million. And if you've been into the chilled section of the supermarket, those triangular shaped bottles from Pressure Fruit, which has got apple juice, it's where the nudie drinks are in the supermarket. That company, first of all, they had a process plant that only could service the Melbourne market, and they needed to get a compression chamber machine that would increase production by 6 times. So they got the funding for that, they installed the machine, they got 6 times production, and now if you go into any supermarket in Australia, Pressure Foods, the Pressure Fruit triangular bottle of apple juice, and that is in all those supermarkets, and that was primarily to get equipment to increase and grow production. And so, yes, if the story is good, in this case people knew that the product was good, and it was a technology. Instead of boiling the juice, it was high pressure, the same pressure as at the bottom of the sea, that killed all the bad things and left the nutrients and flavour and things intact, and that it just seemed to be a great idea, so people invested in it. And so, yeah, you've got to have the right sort of story, and it's got to be something that people like and want and can see that can have potential.
The other thing about, I guess, equity raising for a reasonably larger amount like the $4 million is that there are other options. If you only make it, say, halfway, there are, say, government grants and things like Commercialisation Australia you can approach to then get more money. So it's not the be-all and end-all if you don't get it, and there are other methods to and strategies to actually go ahead and get that entire amount if it's too much for one single platform to fund.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there any downsides to funding for a solo entrepreneur?
For rewards-based, probably. You really do need a team around you, and I'm sure that's the same for equity as well. You really do need a good team and some advice. So the downsides are that you'll have a lot to manage on your own, and it really needs to be the be-all and end-all of your of what you're doing, and it really will suck up a month or 2 of your time at the very least, just during the raise, if not before and after. Now with equity, Paul's much more learned to talk about that, but I'm assuming that you need a team of people around you as well.
Well, exactly, and I think with if you go back to the Pebble Watch raise, which was, it was a reward platform, they got delays because, of course, if they wanted 100,000 first of all, there wasn't going to be many watches, but when you got like 12 million or whatever they got, it was a lot of watches, so they had to work out how they're going to produce those things, so the raise got delayed. And they got so many emails from people each day asking where their watch was. They had to employ 8 people full-time just answering emails. So one of the main things with a reward crowdfunding raise is that you've got to deliver what you promise. And if you can't, then you've got to be able to be prepared to handle the circumstances in between. Otherwise, you breach the Trade Practices Act because you've sold something that you haven't been able to deliver, and you have issues there. So in equity, of course, there is always the downside that you put a lot of effort in and you don't get the money, and people don't like that very much at all. But really, there's not as many downsides, I think, with equity as there with rewards, because often the person on the reward side is not used to actually handling the business of delivering.
Okay, excellent. So there's a question here. Is there a service where I can get advice on putting our proposal or offer together before we go live on crowdfunding?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on whether it's rewards or equity. With ASSOB, if you sign on to our platform, without paying anything, you can get a full structure on what your company will look like after it's raised its money, and what shares you will have, what shares other people will have, what the price will be, then what the value of them will be. So you can get all of that just by requesting, I want to raise capital. In the reward side, if you go to a platform like Indiegogo, you can download their field guide, which is a wonderful publication. And if you read through it and follow through the steps, then you'll be fairly versed in how to do it. And it's not a lot different than what Krystian has said today, the different steps he said for a successful raise. But there they elaborate a bit more about your social media and how you communicate with people. And, you know, the fundamental part of it is they say if you don't know where 40% of the people that are going to be your customers are straight up, don't put your raise up. And so you've got to know pretty much before you push the button, and been communicating with a lot of people to say, look, I'm starting my raise in 2 weeks' time. I know you've always loved what I'm doing. Will you buy one of these? And I say, yes, I will. Have you got any friends that will? And so you build that momentum up so that then that gets started. I'd say that's one of the most important things, getting that initial momentum. As Krystian said, there's like 20, what was it, 20-something, the percentage that don't get anything, or?
It's about 56%.
56%. Well, you don't want to be in that 56%, and you don't need to be if you actually do the preparation and beforehand. Like, it's not like Kevin Costner's build it and they will come. You can't just put it up there and hope that people will come, because it just doesn't simply work like that. Then you'll be terribly disappointed.
In terms of, I guess, rewards, crowdfunding in particular, I would strongly suggest running your pitch by or your strategy by people who are very well versed in digital marketing, social media marketing, those things, and specialists in that area, because really that's going to be a key component of whether you're successful or not. And if they have access to people that can send things viral, or that they can put things up on their Facebook page because they've got 3 million followers, fantastic. But really, if you're looking for a specific service, that's the kind of area I'd be after in terms of rewards-based crowdfunding.
Okay, thank you very much. So the poll results have come back, and 68% of people are planning on trying crowdfunding. Now that's great, guys, because that figure is actually higher than the people who were seeking funding came in. So we haven't actually turned anyone off. Okay, what we've done is seem to have informed people, and that's a very positive response here. So thank you so much for your information and for sharing your insights, your little tips and tricks, and responding to questions. Before we go, I would just like to let people know about our next webinar. And the theme is linked. It's about, got a great idea, what next? And at some stage when you've got a great idea, you're going to have to look for funding. So, but it's a success story. It's you'll hear Wayne Gerard from Red Eye Apps talk about how he did it, what his idea was, how he took it to market, the things he learned, the resources available, his tips and tricks. So join us on the 19th of November for that one. And thank you again. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thanks, Krystian.
Cheers.
I forgot to say it'll be available on the web, but we'll send them out a link.